enhancements. There's a lot. Here's Chris.
Hello, I am Chris Cuomo, and I know you're going to be offended. And I know I'm going to say things that you don't agree with, you're not polite with, but it is a time to stand and be counted. That's where we are. And if I were you, my suggestion is open your eyes and start looking around and listen to what people are saying about what's happening around us. It is a time to be counted. Let's start with what our reality is here first. This is what an Ivy League school is allowing on its campus.
This building is now liberated!
Hind Hall. Hind was the first president of Barnard. Boy, would he be proud. Liberated? How? Had your school wrongly occupied its own building? Why is this campus letting these kids play pretend? You were allowed to break in. You were allowed to break the law, to take actions that disrupted a private institution. There is no First Amendment right to that. The actions ultimately mean nothing positive and only help the people who are against you and your cause. Intifada? It has one context here. Islamist efforts to destroy Israel. It's not about stopping the suffering. It's about causing more. The cure is conversation. This is anathema to that. This feigned outrage. You see this as proof of your power. It isn't. It's of how you're being placated. And I come to you as an ally. I know you're paying attention. I'm listening to you on social media. I welcome it. And no, I'm not going to come up there because I'm going to wind up in a brawl, and that doesn't help anybody. I support the choice to protest against the suffering in Gaza. It is worthy. And if I'm wrong to call what you're doing playing pretend or feigned outrage, then please explain this.
Why should the university be obligated to provide food to people who've taken over a building?
First of all, we're saying that they're obligated to provide food to students who pay for a meal plan here. I guess it's ultimately a question of what kind of community and obligation Columbia feels it has to its students. Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill, even if they disagree with you? If the answer is no, then you should allow it's crazy to say because we're on an Ivy League campus, but this is like basic humanitarian aid we're asking for. Like, could people please have a glass of water?
Seriously? Seriously? You want to break the law and then get catering? You talk about privilege. And she wasn't even aware of it. That is frightening intersection of ignorance and arrogance. You want to appropriate the suffering in Gaza as if it were you, just not the suffering part. What happened to hunger strikes, getting arrested, taking a prosecution for the cause? Change doesn't come easy. Change doesn't come without cost. Go look at what happened during BLM, how blacks and their allies were treated when they destroyed property, and that was in poor areas, let alone some fancy place like a rich college campus. You are being treated with kid gloves, and you better hope it stays that way. I have watched people pay the price in this country, but even more so in others, for their convictions. I have seen people who are committed to a cause. And as you guys like to say these days, you are not him, okay? Now that said, I'm not joining those who condemn mostly white kids for taking up this cause. Often it takes the majority, the powerful, to help a targeted minority because the majority has the power, has the influence. I get it. I just believe there's a lot more heart than head on the issues that are presented here. And you are way late to the cause. The time to push for Gaza was before October 7th, when you were all silent and you're missing who the true malefactor is. Where are the protests against Hamas? Where are the protests to get the hostages back? There are Americans being held. Where are the protests for a terror organization to be removed, taking its boot off the neck of the people in Gaza who want that? For more aid and for media access. You want to point to something that Israel's doing that is not easy to justify. Keeping the eyes of the world off the local situation. It is a mistake. It is an unacceptable exclusion. However, you get people like me on the ground there, and much better than me, people who are much better suited to doing this kind of coverage. I'll go, but they're a lot better than me. You too are going to be confronted with the reality, including how Hamas is using the innocent. These protests are also a reflection of us, our institutions, and our culture. I blame the colleges as much as the kids. Columbia is the latest to capitulate to kids, that they have allowed to be overwhelmed, if not radicalized, by one-sided, hyper-left notions. What do you expect when you don't allow any real debate on campus? Of course, you're breeding people who think it's okay to attack anyone who disagrees, because that's what you do. Now we have Northwestern, another great school, agreeing to allow that protesters can't be identified. Really? Where's the accountability? How can these kids want Israel or anyone held to account if they've never had to own their own actions? Oh, and Northwestern has agreed to give 5 Palestinians free rides to the school. Take a look at the endowment of Northwestern. They and so many other of these big institutions have enough money to give everybody a free ride. Now, look, I'm not against offering opportunity to those who need it. But why are you making any concessions? How about, okay, we'll make some deals with you. But no student of Northwestern will openly align with a terror organization. How about investigating where the money for the protests is coming from? And how much of that money you, Columbia, and all the others have allowed to get to the clubs that are behind this? 5 scholarships. You know who does a lot more than that for Palestine? Israel. Did you know that there are over 1 million Palestinians living and working as citizens there, voting, education? Did you know that Israel is almost a quarter Arab? This racist nonsense, like there's some bastion of whiteness. Jews are not like other whites. They do not get the protection of the majority. None of the rest of us are targets of an existential threat. Now, that said, you can't only want the protest that you agree with. But I'll tell you what we can all agree on. The schools, especially in the Northeast, are failing the kids and their parents. They didn't teach these kids the realities of the conflict. Clearly, they've discouraged discourse, and then they've allowed them to think that you can bully people to think as they feel. Okay? Now, it doesn't work in the Middle East, and it's making us weaker here at home. That said, all of you who are using this, here's my last point. We see even this is being put through the lens of partisan advantage. It's now the latest fodder for the game. Oh, it's just like January 6th. So now the score is even between the toxic left and the toxic right? Thank you for finally admitting that January 6th was a horribly ugly demonstration of illegality and outrage. But no, it's nothing like January 6th. And that takes me to this game of playing the protest to advantage. Who's going to make the case for our values and what they mean in this situation? What does Biden mean? What does he need? What does it mean for the race? And then what about it? What about what actually matters? What about truth? What about your values? Is there even such a thing as right and wrong anymore? Biden's doublespeak. Oh, shocker. He's got problems with his left flank. And his opponent is too busy trying to prove to people that there's no such thing as justice unless he agrees with it. So who's going to step up? You see the two parties, they can't even collaborate on being against anti-Semitism. Now, part of that is just naked politics, right? It's Speaker Johnson trying to save his hiney by owning the effort to get a win here with anti-Semitism. And whose law is it? But there's another part of it that frightens me. These on the left who want to hedge on what anti-Semitism really means and what the definition is. Really? The campuses are not a standalone. They are a measuring stick. For us, no, I'm not these kids. I don't even resemble that world. I didn't even go to college. It's not my point. My point is, what you allow, you empower. Now is the time to speak. I believe that this situation is being treated differently because it involves the Jews. Okay? And yes, that's complicated. And yes, it has long roots. But it frightens me. And I never thought in America I would have Jewish people thanking me for arguing they have a right to exist. Never. This is a time to stand up, to say what you believe, and to be held to account for the same. Too few in power have stepped up, and too many are stepping back. And I hope that you are paying attention. Here, we will engage, okay? And not just about who's winning the protests. I want to talk about why they're happening and what they say about us and what happens next. And I want to do it with people that inspire me, that shape how I think. Scott Galloway, college professor at NYU. You know, they just found fake blood outside the president's home there. There's going to be trouble coming. He said he also couldn't have imagined anything like what we're seeing right now. Self-professed atheist, cultural Jew, who says he is shocked by the anti-Semitism. And it has changed him. Now, he also has something totally off topic, but you want to make yourself better? You want to understand things better? The algebra of wealth is a simple formula for financial security. Look, this is a non sequitur. The book has nothing to do specifically with what we're talking about, but it is a testament to Scott's very unique way of helping you understand things that can make your life better, and you can do it yourself. And the book is part of that. And this conversation will be an extension of how he helps us understand things in the world around us. My brother, good to see you. Thank you for making time, and good luck with the book.
Yeah, Chris, I really enjoyed your opening. Good to be with you.
Well, listen, I wish none of it were necessary. I wish all of this were so obvious that, we were seeing it the same way and it wasn't happening this way. But what do you see in terms of how we reached this point of collective consternation here?
I think it's a variety of things. One, I think on campuses, we have failed in the sense that we have created an orthodoxy, a reductive, crude, lazy thinking orthodoxy of people being divided into two camps, the oppressed and the oppressors. And unfortunately, fairly or unfairly, oppressors are, the way you identify them is how white and how rich they are. And the perception, true or not, of the richest and whitest people, or ground zero for that, are Jews in Israel. Two, to be fair, Chris, I don't think Israel has draped itself in glory over the last 20 or 30 years. The Israel I grew up with, the 67 war, Munich, they were the David, now they're the Goliath. I think Netanyahu has struck a diabolical deal with far-right, bigoted groups within Israel on the Knesset. I think they've been very aggressive. I think they've been incredibly unfair to the Palestinians in the residents of Gaza. So the atmospherics here are terrible. And then finally, and I recognize this is paranoid, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. I think that on social media, the frame through which young people view the world is increasingly on one platform that is controlled by the CCP. And if I were them, I would try and divide America from each other and create rage and polarization. There are 52 pro-Hamas videos served on TikTok for everyone pro-Israel. And you can also layer in other things. Young people see opportunity everywhere except at a younger generation. They're graduating to an economy where they're 24% less wealthy than they were 40 years ago, whereas seniors are 72% wealthier. And they get reminded 210 times a day on their phone that they're not participating in this exceptional prosperity. So I think they're enraged. I think they go on the hunt for fake oppressors. And I think it's spilled over into a campus where DEI, quite frankly, is beginning to eat its own tail and has become like Cersei in Game of Thrones, is the evil that it initially wanted to combat.
What happens next? What needs to happen next?
There needs to be, the only thing worse than being a Trump defense attorney right now is to be a campus leadership. I do feel for them. And I do believe that, and unfortunately it doesn't make for good media, that the majority of the protests have been civil and peaceful. Mm-hmm. And we need to continue the proud legacy of protecting people's rights to free speech. And also just on a human level, as the father of teenagers, and I know you're this as well, Chris, teenager and idiot are synonyms. The point of campus and college is that they have the right to explore their intellectual freedom, say obnoxious things, make mistakes, learn from them, and grow into productive citizens. And I believe that many, if not most of these people, these protests, I hope for them that will happen. But we need to draw sharp relief between people peacefully protesting, even if we don't like what they're saying, and anyone that inhibits or the ability or harasses any other student who also has rights to an education. And where I see the anti-Semitism, quite frankly, and I've said this before, if I went down to the plaza of any of these universities in a white hood and started saying, lynch the blacks, and I in any way harass black students, or, as happened at UCLA today, gave armbands out to everyone but black people, and then inhibited the ability of black people to access university buildings, I would believe there wouldn't be a hand-wringing conversation about First Amendment or context or nuance. I think they would have called in the National Guard. Free speech is never freer when it turns to hate speech against Jews. So sharp relief between civil protest, which I'd like to think most of this is, and swift response, arrest and or expulsion to harassment or encampments. And then more sharp relief, I have absolutely no patience or empathy for any faculty that lacks the critical thinking to in any way empathize with an ideology that, should it gain traction in the United States, would mean that the majority of these students would either be thrown off a roof or summarily executed. They have the right to free speech. We as private organizations have the right to fire them. And I would absolutely advocate for their immediate dismissal. They are not 19.
You bring up what we saw essentially in the 60s when people didn't want blacks to matriculate into these schools. And it is no small irony that disproportionately represented in the resistance to that hate were the Jews. The Jews align themselves with the cause of American blacks uniquely so. And they paid money, blood, and treasure to fight that. And many Jews are telling me now, yeah, we did it because we knew we'd be next. And I never thought in America that I'd be hearing what I'm hearing from Jewish people, and I do not think it's hysterical. I do not think it's paranoid. I do not think it's false panic. I think it's different when it's the Jews. The only justification, last point for you, the Jews are not the blacks. As you referred earlier, David and Goliath. Black Americans had the systemic oppression, they had cultural oppression, they had racial oppression against them. The Jews are seen as the masters of their own fate and the masters over the fate of the Palestinians. And that's why the students are targeting them, because they are the oppressor. Fair analysis.
I think the analysis is fair, but you can type in anti-Semitism and then any century in the last 3,000 years, and you're just going to see multiple examples of why people always find a reason why 0.2% of the population is responsible for the Russian aristocracy's crimes or an economically impaired Germany. And a lot of people have been comparing this to 1968. I would compare it to 1938. And that is Germany in the 30s was a progressive society with a thriving gay community, wonderful universities with celebrated Jewish academics, and then it became fashionable to start blaming the Jews. It became fashionable to put on a brown shirt and start harassing students at the University of Vienna. And Chris and you and I have talked about this. On October the 6th, if someone had said, what is the state of anti-Semitism in the U.S., I would have said it doesn't exist. I was totally blind and immune to it. And as an atheist and someone who has never felt much of a connection to Judaism or to Israel, I see this as the most anti-American activity I have seen since they tried to hold that girl out of school in the 60s. There is no excuse for this. Moderates like you, moderates like me, I would invite everyone to step out of the dark, as you said in your opening, and voice your opinion. We were too quiet 90 years ago. This is the most distinct of what you think of Judaism or the actions of Israel. What is going on here is so un-American. We try and produce on campus for critical thinkers who will lead our nation and invite special interest groups into the fold of the greatest prosperity and freedoms ever enjoyed on this green earth, and that is the United States of America. This is not only anti-Semitic, it is incredibly un-American.
Scott Galloway, I am a big appreciative fan and friend of yours. I appreciate you taking this time to talk about what matters to you. Even though you have a book out, I promise I will do a segment only on your book as soon as we get a little bit of distance from this absolute chaos that we're seeing around us. Hopefully it doesn't further contaminate us. But I appreciate you caring. I think that your voice, as I've said to you privately, we've never needed it more. So thank you for expressing it here.
Thanks, brother.
Oh, man. 4 minutes, 5 seconds. I'm telling you, there are so many great thinkers who see it. You don't have to agree with everything, but it's so important to listen. There's so much food for thought. We can do better than this. We can do better. Conversation is the cure, not what we're seeing this BS on campus. Hunter Biden, using the justice system to get relief. Is it realistic? Threatening to sue Fox for revenge porn of using his images, for advancing notions of bribery that Fox should know are false. His lawyers join me, along with, this is a great pairing, Mark Garagos with his podcast co-host Adam Carolla with a two-sided take on this situation. Next. For Hunter Biden are threatening to sue Fox News for, quote, unlawfully publishing and continuing to publish intimate images of Mr. Biden. They also claim Fox continued to push since discredited bribery allegations as, quote, part of a scheme to paint him in a false light. Hunter Biden's attorney, Mr. Mark Garagos, sent the letter to Fox last week. He joins us along with his podcast co-host, Mr. Adam Carolla. Good to have you both. Mr. Garagos, have you gotten a response to your submission to Fox News?
We have. This morning they took down the mock trial docuseries, which was streaming on Fox Nation. They've hired a law firm, and they issued a statement that, frankly, I don't know that the law firm issued it, but somebody issued it, and it was wrong on the facts and the law. So we responded to that as well. But to their credit, at least trying to mitigate damages, they already took down this so-called mock trial.
Why should they have to take it down? And why, just because Smirnov, the guy who made the bribery allegations, has been indicted, that doesn't mean that we know he wasn't telling the truth. Why is Fox in the wrong?
Well, we now have not just the indictment of Smirnov and the fact that he's, at least if you believe the indictment, is demonstrably false at the information he was feeding. We've also got the congressional testimony of Lev Pernas. We also have additional things that have come to light during our investigation in a very short period of time. It's a wealth of information that shows that there was basically a conspiracy here, and to use and exploit Hunter, and to use Hunter as kind of their piñata, except at this point I'd almost liken it to a slot machine, because they had used Hunter and Hunter's images and her purloined items thousands of times, as has been reported, and was basically clickbait. And so he wasn't going to take that anymore.
Carolla, I know you have affection for Geragos, but do you like his angle on Fox News, or is this an unfair infringement on their ability to have perspective?
Well, as Mark knows, on both sides of the aisle, I'm a big fan of anybody trying to take down any news outlet that's impugning someone's character. I felt very strongly about it with the Covington Catholic school thing and the crazy American Indian guy. I felt it that way when the ladies from The View were attacking Kyle Rittenhouse and calling him a white supremacist. So I think in general, the news needs to slow their roll a little bit when it comes to impugning people's reputation and personality. Hunter Biden's got a lot more miles on him than some of those aforementioned characters, and has been involved with things that were a little shady and nefarious, so he's a less sympathetic character. But in general, if something is untrue and you're profiting off it, then, yeah, some of that money should be clawed back.
But we don't know that it's untrue.
You didn't expect that, did you, Cuomo? That kind of took you. I noticed it kind of stunned you a little bit, kind of stopped you right in your tracks. Where are you going with this, Chris?
Listen, I could be doing this and eating a sandwich at the same time. What I'm trying to do is just think about how
then you'd be a grand jury doing an indictment, but that's a whole different subject.
So a ham sandwich. So look, to your point though, it's just an indictment of Smirnoff. It doesn't mean that everything he said is untrue. And the media puts out unflattering pictures and videos of people all the time. Why should Hunter Biden get a different standard?
He doesn't get a different standard. In fact, God save him from the different standard. To echo and build on what Adam just said, and Adam and I have talked about this for over a decade on the podcast and before that as friends, what has happened is that they use people for certain kinds of clickbaits or attention. They profit off of it. There is a profit motive. And when you do that, you have to, the law is clear. There is a reason. By the way, do you think Fox just took that down in an abundance of caution, as they said? They did it within 18 hours. I'd invite you to read the letter. We gave them chapter and verse as to why they can't do this and why they need to mitigate their damages, which means reduce their exposure. And to their credit, somebody gave them the advice that they needed to do that. But to Adam's point, there has been a turn in the media where they think that it's just a free-for-all, and that, frankly, to some degree, journalism is dead, and we're presiding over this kind of post-journalistic era.
I disagree.
Chris, I think I can shed some light on this.
Please, go ahead.
If you really want to get to the bottom of this and figure out whether there's really meat on the bone or not for this case. Mark, are you doing this for billable hours, or is it on contingency? I think we'll get some clarity here.
Adam has learned that the only way you can determine if a lawyer truly believes in the case is if it's contingency. Because I always tell the clients, if I'm billing you by the hour, that tells you about my belief in the strength of the case. So anybody who knows me knows what I'm doing here. I don't do much billable anymore at all.
So what does it mean that... Listen, This is very interesting, my own perspective on this. One, Geragos is getting me both ways on my case. Second, I am also targeted by the media all the time for profit.
That's true. Right.
So it's a mixed bag for me.
That is true, Chris. Chris, thank you for that transparency, because I was going to say it cuts both ways with you.
So this is a good segue to a project that Brother Carolla is doing, which is Mark's point is for you guys at home that, hey, we're seeing a pendulum shift here, that culturally people are sick of what's been being done and that there's been too much aggression in certain ways and certain angles. So Carolla has a new animated series that's coming out. And it is about a guy who's a Republican, or what we used to call a Republican, who's sick of all the things that we're talking about right now and has to fight against it in his own life. Tell me a little something about it, Adam, and then I want to show people a clip.
I started this character, Mr. Burcham, on K-Rock Radio in Los Angeles 30 years now, and he's a woodshop teacher who's just tired of the PC world. And Mark goes way back to the K-Rock days as well and remembers the character when I used to do it on the air with Jimmy Kimmel on the Kevin and Bean show all those years ago. And finally, after a 30-year steeping process, it's come out in the form of an animated series.
All right, so Mr. Burcham is the name of the new offering from Brother Carolla. Here is a taste.
I don't know what you're talking about, but then again, I never know what you're talking about. You wokesters are always making up words. Latinx, divisive, it's divisive.
No, intersectionality has nothing to do with traffic. No, you don't have to be pregnant to be a birthing person. No, BIPOC is not a dead rapper.
Good luck with it and the controversy that will come. I'm sure it's going to find an audience. And I would just like to note, Garagos is a very, very big believer in my case. I just want you to know that. He would have never come on otherwise. Adam Carolla, much success to you. And Mark Garagos, I appreciate the fight that you're taking up here for Hunter Biden. Not because of how I feel about him, but for you wanting to move that needle. It's a good fight to have. Thank you to both of you. 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Up next, the college protests. What Congress should do. What they should be about. House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan is joining us. He's got a plan. He doesn't like what he's seeing, but for different reasons than you may think. For him, it's not about the kids. It's about terror. Next. Their powers to crack down on anti-Semitism on college campuses. They want to investigate who's funding the protests. This is a very provocative question. Why? Because when you start looking at the money that comes into these schools, because all the talk is about what right now? Divesting from Israel, right? Like it was South Africa during apartheid. But they're not talking about all the money that's been coming into these schools from Arab pockets, okay? And not always the best of pockets. Nothing wrong with Arab money. But from where and why? And how does that feed into what we're seeing right now? Is it just a coincidence? And what should be done with protesters if they're here on a visa? Provocative. If they are saying they are pro-Hamas. Let's bring in the man that is worried about this and wants to do something about it. House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan. Good to see you, sir.
Good to be with you again, Chris.
What is the meat on the bones of concerns about the money?
I think everything you just described. I mean, where's this money coming from? You see all these tents and this kind of organized fashion this is done. Who's financing it? We think that's an important question. And then from the Judiciary Committee perspective, we think, as I said today in this press event, there are three sort of fundamental questions the Biden administration should answer. First, are these students who are engaged in this radical activity, what the law says is espousing or promoting, endorsing terrorist activity, are these students engaged in that? Are they here on a visa? If we know who they are, is the State Department actively trying to revoke that visa? And for those who've had their visa revoked, is the Department of Homeland Security starting removal process, getting them out of the country? Because if you're engaged in that kind of activity, radical activity, not First Amendment protected speech, but radical activity that's against the law, you're not supposed to be here. That's plain and simple. So that's what we're going to look at from the perspective of the Judiciary Committee, which has kind of jurisdiction over immigration law.
So we got guys running across the border with bags of fentanyl, and they get caught and released, and you think they're going to kick out Ivy League students for protesting.
Well, I'm not saying that Mr. Mayorkas and the Biden administration are going to do it, because remember, as you point out, they're the ones who created this problem. They're the ones who on day one fundamentally changed the policies that were working. They said no more wall, no more remain in Mexico, and if you get here, you will be released. So they created this mess, but this situation is getting so bad. We think those fundamental questions are questions the American people have. And frankly, we as members of Congress and the American people would like to know the answers to those fundamental questions. Remember, on September 30th, 2021, Secretary Mayorkas writes a memorandum on how he's going to enforce immigration policy. And he talks about it in that memorandum, what you're looking for. And he says if there's a national threat, a threat to national security, then that's basis for removal. Well, the overarching question is what's going on these campuses, is that a national security threat? It sure looks like it when it's being done primarily, or at least we think in part, by students here on a visa. Remember, at Columbia, 55% of the student body is here on a visa. So a majority of the people there as students are on a visa. Now, maybe there's people coming in engaged in this activity who aren't even students. We don't know. And I think the financing, figuring that all out, will help us determine that. But if there's students who are engaged in this radical activity that's against the law and they're here on a visa, they're supposed to be removed.
I had no idea that high a percentage. I don't even know that's right, that it's 55%. But that certainly provides context. Why not use
30%
this? Go ahead.
I was just going to say 30% at Harvard, 58% at Northeastern, and 42% at NYU. It's a huge number. And that's not just Northeastern schools. Those numbers are pretty high in other schools, not as typically as high in Midwestern state universities,
right.
But it's a significant number of people, students who are here on some kind of visa.
Mr. Chairman, why not use this situation as an opportunity to put together legislation about immigration and the southern border right now and take action and show the American people that something can get done to make these things better instead of just holding it off until after the election?
Well, we've tried. I mean, we tried that. We passed it a year ago. A bulk of that legislation, House Bill 2, came through our committee, the Judiciary Committee, and then the other part of it came through Homeland Security Committee here in Congress. We passed that out of the House. It's been sitting in the Senate for now a year, but Chuck Schumer won't bring it up. So we're for doing something, but it seems to me that the Biden administration isn't. Again, they willfully, deliberately, intentionally created the problem on day one when they reversed the policies that the Trump administration had in place. Frankly, policies that were working, they reversed those. They made that intentional decision to do so on day one, and they've given us this mess, which, by the way, Chris, we're on track to get to 12 million migrants coming in the country in the Biden administration. That's equivalent, that number, 12 million, is equivalent to the entire population of our home state, the state of Ohio. And we're the 7th largest state in the country. That's the magnitude of this problem. So they don't want to address it. For some reason, they want this to continue. I have no idea why, but they do. So that's the problem. We passed legislation a year ago that would fix the problem.
Of course, you had the Senate bill that they say Trump wanted you guys to back off of, but you did pass House Bill 2, and nothing's getting done. And you are right that the Biden administration seems to be okay with the level of inaction at the executive level that we're seeing. I can't disagree with you about that. I look forward to continuing the conversation. I think it's the top of the domestic agenda in this election. Chairman, thank you very much for being with us. To be continued. Jim Jordan. Okay, I can't disagree with him. I've said it to you many times. The border and now what these protests mean in terms of terroristic activity in this country, national security, I'm telling you it's going to be the defining domestic issue. And Biden has to act if he wants to win. 3 minutes, 45 seconds. Up next, Yuri Berliner is back, the NPR editor, former. Was it worth coming forward? And isn't it interesting how the media has just dropped the story before we know that anything was going to change? Next.
Reach adulthood. That's why vaccines matter so much. For 40 years, Rotary and partners have delivered vaccines globally. Like here and even here, in your neighborhood and around the world, Rotary is ensuring children grow up safe from preventable diseases.
You're listening to NewsNation, America's fastest-growing cable news network, covering a full range of perspectives from across the country.
Smokey the Bear.
Then you know why Smokey tells you when he sees you passing through. Remember, please be careful, it's the least that you can do.
What you desire, don't play with matches, don't play with fire.
After 80 years of learning his wildfire prevention tips, Smokey Bear lives within us all. Learn more at SmokeyBear.com. And remember,
only you can prevent wildfires.
Brought to you by the USDA Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Junior Achievement is where dreams take flight. We are helping students connect what they learn in school to future work and career success. We are teaching them how to manage money to achieve financial security as adults. And we are showing them that starting a business also means changing lives and communities. However, we can't do it alone. Go to ja.org to learn more.
Are you prepared for an emergency or disaster? Because it's not a matter of if, but when. Don't find yourself saying,
I'll trust water bottles and a flashlight to save the day, but I'll be proved wrong.
With a tornado approaching, I'll realize that I lack a wheelchair-accessible shelter.
When the floodwaters rise, I'll be up in the attic with 20 cans of beans. It's a recipe for disaster.
Let's prepare so we all have a better story to tell. Get started at ready.gov/older adults. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
All right, let's bring in Yuri Berliner, okay, the former business editor at NPR. He resigned after he wrote an article for the Free Press calling out what he saw as liberal bias at NPR. It's good to see you, brother. As we have spoken privately, I'm not surprised by what's happened, but I do want to call out the fact that the media has just dropped the story. So the pushback to you, Yuri, it was Steve Inskeep, then it was other people at NPR saying you cherry-picked the situation and you got it wrong. Do you believe, in retrospect, you should have done anything different?
No, not at all. Hi, Chris. First of all, not at all. I think even in the NPR newsroom, since the story was published, they've decided to institute regular reviews of coverage, which I think is a positive sign. I also think there's a conversation in this country that's happening within the media, but also more broadly about the really sad level of trust of the media and the extent to which narratives are imposed in newsrooms, whether they're legacy media and they're left-leaning or whether they're coming from the right. And I think there's a large group of people that are tired of it and are just calling out the media for doing things that are increasing the polarization in this country. So I don't have any regrets.
I like what Barry's doing at the Free Press, Barry Weiss. People should look her up. I think a lot of these independent media sources are just trying to capitalize by trying to take market share, but I was moved by the media leaving this story alone. And it does feed the narrative that they only like gotcha type self-examination, but they don't want to be a part of any real discussion about how we're doing the job. What does it mean for you going forward?
Well, I think there was a lot of positive stories, including, interestingly, from college newspapers supporting what I said and saying it's vital, and from reporters and columnists around the country. I would say this story lasted a lot longer than I expected it to. I thought, I would write this and there would be pushback in the newsroom, and it would be over in a couple of days. The head of the newsroom criticized the story. I think she did it in a fairly respectful way. I was suspended 5 days without pay. I didn't object to that. I didn't seek a grievance from the union. And I thought it was going to go away after that. But then the new CEO, Catherine Marr, she injected herself into the newsroom and she attacked me publicly and personally. And I think that extended the story, especially when people started finding out more about her views, not just the tweets, about America being addicted to white supremacy or criticizing Hillary Clinton for using the words. Importantly, videos that surfaced where she talked about the First Amendment being a challenge and a tricky thing when you're trying to suppress information. This is when she was running Wikimedia, which oversees Wikipedia. And I think that's really extended the story a lot.
I thought it was really interesting that a lot of the pushback from the staff that came out in public at NPR was actually about making it more woke, about making it more what is ascribed that way, that they didn't like that your grievances got so much attention instead of their grievances that would have pushed the agenda even more to the left.
I totally agree with you. I think that really NPR has a lot of soul searching to do about representing the country at large, being a publicly funded news organization and really trying to represent this country in all its great diversity and viewpoints.
Well, Yuri, let's keep talking. Yuri Berliner, I look forward to seeing what's next for you, and you're always welcome on this show. Thank you for speaking the truth. That's all I got time for. Dan Abrams after a quick break. Take care, Yuri. And you take care.